So, I keep reading about this wall, and at one point, our former leader, Mike Pence, said something about the White House would accept $2.5 billion. And then, of course, the president says, no, $5.6 billion. And then just the other day, yesterday, like before I went to bed, I read something about $5.7 billion. Why does it keep going up? It's like, is it just... Why does it keep going up? It shouldn't keep going up.
Well, I mean, technically, what they're quoting is not even close to what it's been.
Well, of course, it's like the estimates are all like 20 to 25 billion.
Yeah, so the idea of building part of the wall and funding part of the wall is a pretty absurd notion on its head. So that's kind of where... I mean, it's going to keep going up until they actually reach the number that's been quoted, which to me... We have the Democrats coming into power now, and the government is still shut down as of this recording. So I'm always wondering why people who would identify themselves as left-wing wouldn't want this to continue. And in the sense of not just wanting Donald Trump to get a loss. It's not even about that. Let's remove him from the situation. If you're supposed to be a left-winger identifying with this ideology of being anti-war, military-industrial complex,
pro-immigration, pro-healthcare, pro-education, pro-institution,
pro all of the things that the left wing is supposed to be associated with. In my head, this would be the perfect opportunity to say, yeah, just let this government stay shut down. As long as if you can let it stay down until 2020, stay shut down until 2020, do it. Because for many reasons, there are already solutions in place that we could say, work with each other as private citizens to use these things to fix these problems. In the meantime, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be education, whether it be healthcare, let's work with each other in the private sector to solve these problems for now. And then in 2020, let's get rid of all these motherfuckers. Let's get rid of all of these motherfuckers that have not done anything but be obstructionists, and then try to make this a racially charged, xenophobic foundation of what is driving the rhetoric in this country. And I think that's where it's like, let's end all that. Let's prove for once and for all that these people are regressives, that this country does not want anything to do with those people, and further, that we don't need them. Because from my perspective, the potholes and the roads were fucked with the government open anyway. So it's like, if we're saying, oh, the government's not going to fix the potholes because of shit. Well, they weren't fixing the fucking potholes in the first place.
Yeah.
If anyone was fixing potholes, it was a private corporation that the government was actually hiring. So we're in a situation where, because of the negative things associated with government-owned production means, which has been associated with a bastardized interpretation of communism. So
my understanding of government contracts is that you have to be doing something on a fairly large scale, which means there's a considerable amount of subcontracting going on.
Absolutely. You're spot on.
At that level, there's a great opportunity for local government, which is a more genuine reflection of a community.
That would be great.
If they were to do these things. But I think that the channels or the mechanisms to gain access to these kinds of resources have been kind of restricted.
Absolutely. There are no big contracts
to the federal level, because
they're mostly no big contracts.
Yeah.
And this is why. So when we're talking, what you're saying would be fucking amazing, except the reality is, when those contracts come up, they get given to European companies that don't have any relation to where we are. So these people building the roads that we're driving on, they're being designed by European companies in many cases, or non-American companies, and then subcontracted out at shitty rates to local companies who didn't get the contract. So it's this weird.
No wonder our
the
roads
middleman
fall
effect.
apart.
Exactly, the middleman is siphoning out at every point.
I don't think that there are. I don't think that the roads in Europe could handle all of the trucks in America.
Mm-mm.
I don't think. I mean, I've driven all over this country, and there are a few places where the roads aren't terrible, and it's generally places that have a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't see a lot of big trucks in those places, like at all. And you see like you always find like what amount to service communities that reside like just on the fringes of these really nice regions, and you see all the trucks there.
Yep. And you're
on the
nailing on something. I think
highways, it's all trucks nowadays. The American, the face of the what's available in the American auto market is changing in such a way that almost all of the American manufacturers are dropping cars from their lines. Sports cars are the only ones that are sticking around, it seems. And like luxury cars, like Cadillacs and Buicks, I think they're keeping a few cars, but.
Wow.
It's it's the Mustang and and the Corvette, and I think Dodge and Chrysler are keeping a few.
Wow.
But they're all like muscle cars. There are no small sedans, no entry level cars. I mean, they're all just these weird. They call them crossovers, but they're really like station wagons.
And I mean,
they kind of look like.
Where are you even able to drive those muscle cars? That most of the speed limits in this country are not very high.
Yeah, well,
you rarely get up to 85s.
You got to go to like Utah
or Texas or some shit. Like,
I think like I've seen 80 miles an hour in Utah, and I know they drive 80 in certain parts of Texas.
I think 85 I've seen in Texas.
I think Montana has some open sections of road.
Yeah, I don't know if they do that anymore.
Oh, they probably don't.
I think they stopped. They used to have that, and I think they stopped. I mean, we could look. I don't know if it's that important, but
it's not important. It's I mean, statistically that you're going 100 plus miles an hour, and a moose steps out in front of you. You don't have time to swerve because you can't swerve at 125 miles an hour. And
there's just too much of that where there's going to be problems. Like,
yeah, and the moose pulls some like Colossus level like absurdity and like puts its head down and rams the car and flips it over it, and it's fine because it's a fucking moose.
Yeah, we hit a deer once and totaled our car, and the deer fucking got up and walked away.
Goddamn deer.
It was a Ford Aerostar.
So that's not a car, that's a van.
It's a van, yeah, so it wasn't a small. I mean, it had a car chassis, which is where I'm fairly positive, unless that was the. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they had a Taurus chassis.
No, I think the Aerostars were the same. Originally, they were the same platform as a Ranger and an Explorer. Those things are like pretty tough.
Yeah.
Man, that must have been a serious deer. It was like some 8-point buck, like some like huge antler thing.
Whatever it was, it definitely got up and walked away. I don't know if it survived, the night, but
man, I hit a deer once in a Dodge Caravan, and it ripped the bumper off and one of the headlamps and the grill. And when I walked around to the front of the car to look at it, my door wouldn't open, so I had to get out the sliding door, so behind the passenger. So I walk around and I see this, the green coolant spraying out of the front, and I see this kind of fuzz and blood dripping everywhere. It's like, what the fuck? And then my buddy comes back, and he'd walked up the road to see what happened, and apparently the moon was out in such a position that when he walked north on the southbound road, the blood lit up, it just reflected the moon, so it's completely visible. This big streak, 50-60 foot long streak of deer intestine, and Jesus. There was a deer carcass, and It's pretty traumatic. I ended up throwing up on the side of the road. So yeah, that was. I think deer are pretty tough. I think they destroy vehicles no matter what you
They
have.
definitely do.
Like even if you have like, I think even if you have the baddest truck, the deer's just gonna just destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, most people aren't going to be going too slow. So.
Yeah, I was on 67, Highway 67 southbound, right next to let's see, what is it? There's like a gas station, and right before you get to the whole Mooresville junction, there's like Centerton, I think. Used to have a subway there, like the random subway in the middle of nowhere on 67, one of those things. Pretty like fortunate that it happened there. My dad and I went back the next day and turned the engine on, trying to let's see how long this thing will run, and it never overheated. It didn't run out of steam. It just he said maybe we should drive it home, and I said no. I think he was joking.
Yeah, accidents are crazy. I'm always amazed that when somebody's car gets totaled and there's no injury whatsoever, there's sometimes it's the engineering.
It's incredible.
Those crumple zones and
the airbags and the way the restraint systems, they break certain levels of stitching so that the seatbelt doesn't just grab a hold of you.
Right.
It snaps as you go into it. Reduces
a little bit of give.
Yeah, reduces the impact just a little, just enough that it doesn't fracture your hip or something like that.
Yeah, I'm wondering how long it'll be before there's G-force detectors that'll deploy foam or something.
Oh, like Demolition Man style?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that'll be great.
It's only a matter of time.
Well, I kind of have this weird obsession with the NHTSA videos, the crash test videos, or the IHSS videos, where they take different cars and just destroy them. And they did one where they brought a Chevy Malibu, a modern Chevy Malibu, and then an old Chevy Malibu, and they show the damage. They show the impact from both cabins, and the modern car just. No problem. All the airbags that need to deploy and protect the occupant. Whereas in the old Malibu, the dummy is just, grab a shovel and a trash bag. No, we don't need a stretcher.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. And these are at modern impact speeds, averaged impact speeds, the ones they test modern cars at. So if that's what happens to an old car. Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
That's a really old car, too.
I've been in a few accidents, and just the different types of cars. If I have to be in a car, I hope it's a Mercedes. And preferably like a 80s Mercedes. Those things are fucking tanks, man. And the couple of bad accidents I've been in were in 80s Mercedes and barely got a scratch on me at all. Someone ran a stop sign, T-boned the rear wheel, and their
car got
fucked up. It spun their car around, not mine, because it was like a Kia or a Hyundai or something. I forget. It was some little tiny car.
Volvos are pretty tough too. I knew a guy who got similarly.
Oh, Volvos are very tough.
Similarly rear-ended in his Volvo, and all that happened to his car was the bumper. The U.S. mandated rear bumper, so that extra bulgy thing that wasn't even designed for the car except for American market at the time. It was like an 80s boxy Volvo. That popped off. That's all that happened to his car. I think he had a flat tire on the side that got hit too, but that was just it got depressurized because it got hit, and it would have repressurized. It didn't have any tears or anything. the car that hit it was a Mitsubishi, like a late 90s, early 2000s Mitsubishi Galant. And so it was missing the whole front cowl was gone. The bumper was somewhere in the street. It didn't bust the radiator, so it was good on fluids. One of the lights was droopy. The whole front end was fucked up though. The whole front end was like completely gone, and we weren't even sure like how it happened. It was just one of those like, how do you rear end a Volvo? They're huge. They're so visible.
Humans.
I think a Suburban might be equally indestructible.
Yeah, Suburbans. Well, I know those are.
But they also have extremely high destructive capability too.
Yeah. I think it'd be too easy to flip one of those things.
Yeah.
Just because they can get going up pretty quick.
Oh yeah.
Pretty fast, and I know kids that were driving those things and driving them the way they shouldn't have been, and it was very sketchy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm like thinking about this stuff. I'm amazed at how many more kids don't die doing dumb shit in high school with cars.
So
just thinking back on the shit that
when you were in high school, when I was in high school, there were guys who had big monsterish trucks in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And they had gun racks in the back where they would keep their crossbow or compound bow and arrows, because they would take bow hunting class, and some of them would keep their fishing equipment there. And I'm pretty sure the few of them had rifles in the back of their in their cars, and no one ever said anything. No one cared, because it was like, they're not doing anything wrong. They're in school. They have it
pre-Columbine.
Huh? Yeah, it's pre-Columbine. So no one really hesitated. It's like, no, they're part of the hunting class. They're cool. They're doing their thing. Mm-hmm. They're going to go on some field trip and go camping for some weekend and bag a deer or something. That's actually kind of cool. That was probably a thing once. I don't think that could happen anymore.
No, I mean,
I don't think kids are allowed to take fucking compound bows or crossbows to school, are they?
No fucking way. No way. God, no. No, but they can't be trusted. That's part of the problem. Is even when those kids were doing it, some kid was out shooting some animal that he shouldn't have been. You know what I mean? It just didn't get caught, and it wasn't. I think what ends up happening is we look at history, especially our parents and grandparents do this, or those generations, that they'll look at things and say, this is the way it used to be. We used to be able to take guns to school, and it was not a big deal. But they always leave out the part where somebody used that gun to bully somebody else after school, and that shit happened. It's just they always leave out the negative part, and everybody always wants to remember the good parts about these things when they're trying to point down at the upcoming generation. And that's kind of where
I think that comes from, like a very interesting, well, because history is told by the people who have the power, obviously, and they get to decide what the history is. But even like on a very localized level, like with like our elders, I know that the version of America that they saw during the civil rights was different from, like, my grandparents, was different from like my dad's. Mm-hmm. And I know this because they've told me about like a few of the times they had disputes during the civil rights movement. It's like, and in my mind, of course, it's like, really, what? Okay, whatever. I don't need to know these things. That's like not my era. I don't actually think I can fully understand or appreciate like what happened, because we're looking through this lens of cultivated, curated, this is the civil rights movement, and this is how it happened, and these were the people that were there. And it's complex because history is obviously not that simple.
Right. Well, that's what's so interesting to me about revisiting a lot of the civil rights stuff. I don't know how much you've listened to recently, but these people get romanticized in a way that I don't think that is connected to what actually happened when these things went down. So a good example is Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. What those guys represent historically, obviously, is a lot to black people and to the civil rights movement for various reasons. But when we're talking about what those guys represent, they're often associated with what, well, I don't know if Malcolm X would be necessarily associated with the Democratic left wing, but I know the Democratic left wing would definitely claim Martin Luther King today. Both of those guys were not accepted by the Democratic left wing back then.
In their day.
And even to the point where Malcolm X was very outspoken against white liberals. A lot of the stuff he said then still applies today, in the sense that when we're talking about what would be called the feminism movement, he was saying that none of it really applied to women of color, and if you look at it, it's actually pretty accurate of a statement that still applies even today. So this is where, when we look at nothing obviously binary or black and white.
You mentioned something that I read on Facebook recently about how if people are really trying to champion equality, they will be more interested. They should try to be more interested in like platforms and qualifications and the history of participation and the kind of guidance this person is trying to develop as a politician or a member of a community, as opposed to traditional values. It's like, oh well, this person fits my expectations of what I want for a politician, because that is also socialized. Mm-hmm. Our expectations have been built in by the fairy tales and the expectations that are given to us in school, and so it's for equality and equity and equitability to work. We have to start really opening up and offering these people of ethnic communities the opportunity to participate. Mm-hmm. I think we've got a really interesting. I was just reading about how we've got like 2 Islamic congressmen for the first time. Mm-hmm. And one of them was sworn in with Thomas Jefferson's copy of the Quran. And it makes you wonder. It's like, how much did they know? Like, how much did the founders actually know about Islam? Because it had been around for quite a while at this point. I'm pretty sure they would have been aware.
Oh, absolutely. I would assume they knew like a significant portion, in the sense that one of the issues with Islam is it gets put into one flag. So right then we're talking about the Ottoman Empire and the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
So this is where still like those two things are not the same entities, even though they represent what would be parts of Islam, or even more so, what's the word? They would be kind of the pinnacles of the Islamic leadership communities at the time that are outside of Mecca itself. Yeah. And this is where
the imams and their I don't know enough about Islam to talk about like the hierarchy of the way that they.
I mean, you shouldn't feel bad, because most Americans don't, but they feel comfortable talking about it anyway. And this is where it gets complex, because So what you're saying is, like, when we're talking about that time period, this is a complex time period for Islam because it's coming out of like post Mongol invasion, pre deconstruction via Western war. There's still a shitload of things that happen, including the Mughal invasion, which is like the Taj Mahal is effectively an Islamic structure, depending on how you define. This is like depending on how you want to define things.
I feel like I read what I thought was a tabloid that was talking about how they're going to tear the Taj Mahal down.
No, there's no way.
Like there was somebody like in India was talking about it. Like maybe it's like
there's probably an opposition like party that's probably pushing some sort of
or some like fringe element that wants
to do that wants to get elected on that initiative. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's no fucking way that any government would permit that. It's just too much of a cash crop for tourism. There's no way. They might renovate it. There's no way in hell the Indian government would let that. That would be like saying
let's get rid of one of the
Egyptian government would let one of the Great Pyramids get torn down. They won't even let fucking people researching that bitch, let alone approve tearing it down. That's where like sometimes people will run on this fantastic type
bullshit narrative,
and people will get behind it because they're crazy enough to think that person actually has a chance to get that thing passed. Getting back to the same way that there's really no way this wall was like this asshole ran on the Mexican government paying for this wall that we're now discussing.
$5.7 billion.
Full circle, $5.7 billion was this whole ridiculous. It was like something ridiculous he ran on that was never going to happen, that made no fucking sense on paper, off paper, in air, off air. It made no sense anywhere except to crazy people. And there just happened to be enough crazy people to make that, to get the Electoral College, swayed one way.
This morning I was reading about how there's a concern that the shutdown is going to affect SNAP benefits, the Federal Supplemental Nutrition and I don't even know what the other two words are, the acronym. Aid program. There we go. Supplemental Nutritional Aid Program. And they said in last year in September, which is the last time they did their regular quarterly audit, they'd spent something like $4.7 billion that month.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna make some weird claim that it's like they spend more on social services soon than they need for this wall, and that's what how they're justifying it, I think.
That'll be hilarious because then most of those social services are going to be going to people in like Appalachia and shit.
Yeah.
So it's gonna go ahead, defund those things for a border wall, because the first people that are going to be hit are the ones that are calling for this border wall. I want to see that shit happen personally, because then this is like the beauty of that. It's the beautiful irony of ignorant people making decisions based on their feelings. Those are the people that end up fucking themselves over, because this is why when you look at people who identify as Republican, most of the time they're just poor, lower class, working class people who believe that the Republican Party is actually working in their favor, when the Republican Party only cares about rich people.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the demographics for this for immigration are had this really unique like revolving door effect from Reagan through Obama, where people would come
Christian Coalition.
Oh God, the Christian! I forgot about them. They haven't been in the news in a while.
Well, it's because they're good at staying behind the shadows.
Well, apparently at some point recently with the current administration, No, it was before that. It was towards the end of Obama. It was because it was because of the second financial crisis of our lifetimes. The immigration changed, and now where there are fewer people coming and going because it was just easier to stick around for a while. But these are people who are coming here like on airplanes, and they just were overstaying their visas.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the people that are doing this are in cities and generally have jobs in technology. They have skilled. These are skilled laborers who are overstaying their visas. It's not so much like immigrant. There are immigrants who come in and just cross the border,
mm-hmm.
and that's always going to be a thing, because this is America. This is where you have the opportunity to unlock your potential and have a piece of the American dream. And I think that still exists for a lot of people, and I think it's good that exists for a lot of people, because people should want to come here. This should be a goal to live on the what do they call it? The shining city on the hill. Mm-hmm. That's what they called it in like the 80s or something like that. The Reaganomics, the one that was promising us. But it's when they make it harder for people to come and go, that's also when people stay.
Right.
It complicates things.
Yeah.
And I think the way the demographics worked is that the red states weren't even getting a lot of immigrants anyways.
Right. Oh.
So the fear that they were taking jobs.
Immigrants don't want to go hang around those people.
Of course not. So that's the dilemma. It's like, this narrative that they're losing jobs, or they have to compete with people who aren't paying taxes. Like, I'm sure that they would gladly pay taxes if they weren't afraid of getting deported, thrown in jail.
Well, I'm pretty sure what ends up happening is many of these immigrants end up paying taxes for various reasons. It's just not income taxes that they pay, because they're usually paid on their table. So they'll pay taxes for buying things, like they may be paying like taxes on their property they're renting. So it's not like immigrants don't pay any taxes. They actually end up paying a lot of taxes, like via just living here. This is what's so crazy about taxation. If you live in the United States, even if you're not a citizen, you're going to end up paying taxes one way or another. If it's through sales tax,
you can't,
excise tax, or whatever.
You can't exist in this country without
paying a tax,
without existing in some kind of local economy, or some kind of economy.
Absolutely.
You have to receive a good, or be able to ship a good out, or go pick something out of the store so you can eat.
Therefore, every immigrant is going to be contributing to their local economy by proxy of that fact. You can't exist in the local economy and not order food locally at some point. It's just impossible.
Or not go to a store.
Not go to a store at some point.
You got to go to the grocery store.
And these are just facts of, there's a basic reality of existence that also coincides with the foundation of microeconomics that a lot of people are not familiar with. So this is why when you're talking about investing, there's a few things that you can look to, like toilet paper, beer, and diapers. These are things that when you go into microeconomics and macroeconomics classes, they will discuss those three things as the staples of like society, as to why you can always look to those things to gauge where society is at, but also you can also depend on those things.
What were your examples again?
Beer.
Okay, so you mentioned
diapers and toilet paper.
So that's one of the three vices that my dad and I always joke about is for vice funds: the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
There you go.
The the agency.
The ATF.
Yeah, it's the agency vice fund.
Yeah.
And it's because even in times of recession, people need cigarettes and booze, and when you're paranoid, you end up with guns.
And then people have to shit.
Yep.
So this is another okay. And in that context, what I was getting at is
Sorry, I didn't.
No.
You just reminded me of like the funds that I always put my money in.
That's proving my point. So it's not a distraction. It's more so in that context. Those are the things that are always surefire,
kind of
recession-proof stock investments. You just have to know which company to invest in, but it's also the way to monitor how people's morale is doing can also be related to those things. So if people are like skimping on diapers
or firearms,
like,
and buying mostly cigarettes and
you can tell a lot about the psyche based on how these things are being purchased. And that's where it's like really crazy. Like if people are, okay, for example, toilet paper doesn't sound like you could infer a lot, but if people are purchasing high quality toilet paper while there's a recession, then that says a lot about how much they value themselves and how much they don't want to be what's the word, inconvenienced. It's like they would rather have a luxury and convenience than the money that they could save by buying low quality toilet paper. So that's just an example of how whatever you're looking at, if you're reading it, there's things you're going to be able to extrapolate on these purchases that tell a lot, and those are the things that are also common across communities, even even Muslim communities that don't, where it's like they don't necessarily have alcohol all the time, like in every situation, where it's like there may be dry areas of the state or country or something where even in those places they're consuming beer. You need to take them out. But yeah, there's just some things that are when we're looking at trying to figure out where humanity is going, I think we end up looking at it's hard for people not to be stuck in a left and right wing point of view, but all you have to do is go back a little bit to see that those points of view do not hold up on either side as ways to view everything. There's just too much inconsistency in their histories.
Well, it's a dynamic spectrum, and that's the dilemma. Is that we can, if we look at, if we observe everything in these quantified states, then it's easy to lose picture of where we've come from and the kind of decisions and precedents that have been made or set before that allowed us to get to where we are. I think that we would have had a different. I think that Gore being president would have been a completely different place. Mm-hmm. I think that we would have had a much more mutually beneficial, but mainly beneficial for the United States in the long run, environmental policy that everyone else would have adopted. I think he's done quite a bit. Al Gore's done an incredible job as a former vice president. I think that had he been a president, he would have had an incredible impact, and I think we'd be in a different place, like socially, environmentally, jobs-wise.
I mean, I think there's no doubt, and
I think that he was into a whole. I think he was like the most legitimate thing about the Clinton administration.
Yeah, no doubt. And even further, I think he would have probably done a lot to deconstruct the military-industrial complex and refocus that in sustainable investment. Because I think what ends up happening is when you're in a military-industrial complex state, they are still convinced that military industrial is the only path forward in the future. And just because those people are in power does not mean that we can't look to alternative methods in the meantime. And I think this is why it's like all the people who aren't deterred by military industrials have still looked to people like Al Gore.
I think that a merit-based, through testing and analysis, nationalized workforce that trains people in emergency response or in construction or in, infrastructure deployment. Those are the things that the military does. They do those things really well. They do those things incredibly well. I think those kinds of abilities, if those were used to make the United States a better place, lo and behold, this would be an incredible country. We would have the best roads. We would have incredible water supplies, like man-made lakes that could be used for recreation and water supplies and fishing, and all of the things that come with having all these things. The things that we built after the Great Depression, after World War I, and all that good stuff.
What's crazy about what you're saying is what ends up happening with military operations is they have to build a lot of shit in order to execute.
Yeah, just to function.
They have to build bridges.
They have to build a small city to operate out of.
Exactly. So these people are already trained and already do these things in a lot of cases. And a lot of times they're doing peacekeeping missions. So I'd never want to frame the military as if all they do is destroy, because that's absolutely not accurate. And further, this is why it was so easy for them to be re-outfitted after the Hurricane Harvey, and deployed in Houston. And this is where there is an alternate universe where we re-outfit the entire military to be constructive forces that just deploy all over the United States and just rebuild and build new infrastructure. And in 4 years, we would be 10 years ahead of where we would be if we did not do this. It's a matter of,
I feel like
we should turn inward in the way that China did without the fucking wall. And the issue is, when China turned inward, they advanced themselves culturally fucking thousands of years ahead of the rest of the world in a way that they only opened up fucking a couple hundred years ago.
It's funny. Like, they spent roughly 30 to 45 years industrializing, really industrializing. And in that, let's just call it 50 years. They spent 50 years industrializing. In that span, they managed to socialize and to undergo social evolution, like you said, like advancing at a rate that is just incredible. They are a unified society in so many ways. Like, and of course, we're outsiders and can only read and understand so much because translations are only so good.
Yep.
And we got to have a grain of salt with a few things, because the media is the media, and even the best of spooks and spies, they've got their motivations too. And so on some level, China's has got this incredible thing going, though. Like, I remember when like in the, I guess it was the early 2000s, I would always read about how, like, China's economy is set to go straight to the moon, it's with that kind of like dynamic 50s flair.
Yeah. Did you hear about Bitcoin? Well, it's funny too, because I'm glad you brought that up. What's happening with the trade wars, or what appear to be trade wars,
the trade wars,
is really just the Chinese government taking the great opportunity to play a slowing economy into appearing to have a trade war. So if you knew your economy was slowing, and you could make it seem like the way to shore up your slowing economy was by pretending to get into a trade war that you would then have to make capitulations within to appease the trade war, but in the process you're actually shoring up the economy that needed to be shored up in the first place. This is, to me,
that's just smart economics.
Absolutely, and smart diplomacy, because the Chinese economy was about to hit a major slowdown, and all of the things that they're quote unquote capitulating in the trade war are things they would have needed to do to make sure their economy didn't actually come to a screeching halt.
You know, I bet that, you know, like 10, 20 years, it'll be revealed that in addition to, you know, how they built like scale models of Paris or Berlin or whatever, however many cities they've made duplicates of.
Yeah.
Like, they'll have made like a special Trump. in Trump City, and it'll be like a modified version of Las Vegas and Atlantic City.
Yeah.
And have a small section that looks like part of New York City, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that's what's going to happen.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Because I feel like they're running out of you know, top shelf cities to build replicas. They can't even find people to live in these cities. They're just like empty, waiting with like complete
50 million empty units,
complete with furniture, still has the plastic on it. You just gotta like take off, and voila, here's your kitchen unit has like, you know, pots and pans ready to go.
Yeah. Well, I'm always baffled at this notion of empty houses and homeless people coexisting within any context. Like, any country that has a leader that allows that to happen, to me, is like still archaic in any whatever country we're talking about, because some countries have put themselves on the track to solve this problem, and that's kind of where I'm looking at leaders, and I'm thinking, I don't care if you call yourself a communist, I don't care if you call yourself a capitalist, if there is a large number of empty, vacant properties and a large number of homeless people, and those two things coexist, that's a failure of leadership. I don't care what that leader exists under.
You know, the sad part is that the data is there that could be used. You know, the data exists to identify who needs a place to live and the places that need somebody to live there.
Yep.
And largely the problem is the financial institution that owns the house. They want to get their loan, their mortgage money back out of it, so they don't just want to like give it away.
Absolutely.
Which is,
I understand.
You know, that's the
However,
dilemma. It's kind of sad.
It is, and this is the issue
so
where
much about
we're
our
like,
society.
it does, and this is where I'm like looking at human civilization and saying, oh no, we're not evolved at all yet. We have so far to go. And we know for a fact it would take about $20 billion to fix homelessness in America. That's just in America.
13 years ago when I was in China, I remember we saw you know, a beggar on the street. And I asked the tour, I was like, hey, what's the deal with this? I thought that you know, you guys were like socialists or something. She's like, oh, no, if you want a job, you have a job. That person has mental illness and they haven't been able to get help. You know, like there are like they explain that there are in China they have resources and social services to help people. There's some people are so, you know, out of their gourds that they won't even take the medicine, and you can't. You can, I guess they will eventually be hospitalized once they find them and catch them.
Well, if they become a nuisance or a danger, that's when it happens.
But you know, it was kind of interesting. Like, everyone that we encountered had a cell phone, and everyone had opportunity to have a job. We saw people just like sweeping the street and changing trash bags, and it's like that's an entire job. You know, keep the place clean. And China was, you know, aside from the air quality, was actually one of the cleanest places I've ever been, like, the entire time I was there. Even the back alley shed bucket that I peed in because I drank too many beer on the tour bus between cities, you know, in 4-hour bus ride or whatever, they kicked in. You know, even that was clean. So it was an extremely clean culture. I think, you know, I can get arrested for spitting, so.
Right. I mean, and this is in contrast to when the founding fathers were learning about Islam. people in Europe are fucking shitting in the streets. And wearing high heels instead of fucking not shitting in the streets.
And wearing cologne and perfume because they didn't like bathing.
Right, yeah. So that's kind of when you know those things were coexisting. It's illegal to spit in the streets in China. Probably still back then. I don't think that law is new. I think it's less enforced now than it was probably then.
Well,
and
I think
where it's like,
I think back then, or I think in China, there's a culture of preemptive medicine. Like a lot of Eastern medicine is like, hey,
which includes hygiene.
Exactly. So if you're starting to feel a little ill, just increase your ginger intake
and take a bath.
Yeah. Take 2 baths.
No, for sure.
Eat a bunch of rice and drink some soup. Get hydrated.
It's a very different approach.
And take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Here, make a tea out of this really bitter root. It'll help keep you from wanting to go do these other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what frustrates me about being born in the West as a non-European person, because I see European Western medicine just constantly rediscovering things that have already been assessed and figured out by Eastern medicine, and then it's like we need the Western stamp of approval to validate it for whatever reason. And this is, to me, one of the it's one of the aspects of colonialism that I think a lot of people don't realize that they're stuck in, where it's a matter of Western validation shouldn't be necessary.
So when I was
anything,
when I was 25 and in touring around China with my family, we stopped in Beijing in at the Ming Apothecary.
Mm-hmm.
So like the official the building that housed the apothecary of the Ming Dynasty.
Jesus.
And so my parents went and took the tour, and I didn't want to go walk around the thing. I was kind of tired. So I just hung out and walked around like the main floor, which was essentially like, a super pharmacy of Eastern medicine. And I walked up to a counter because I saw this attendant, and he said, "How can I help you?" And well, we established that I couldn't speak Chinese and that I needed to communicate in English, and he was fine. He spoke English perfectly. And I said, "What's the Eastern equivalent to Viagra?" And he smiled and said, "Come with me." And so he leads me to this case and opens it up and pulls out this tray. It's about 3 feet wide and 18 or so inches deep, and pulls it out and sets it on the counter, and had this fantastic green like binding, green and gold binding. It was beautiful. Mm-hmm. And on it were these 3 I'm not really sure how to describe them. They looked like big pieces of meat, and they were penises. There was boar and bear and elk, and I said, how do you even use this? He said, "Oh, grind it up and make a broth, and you'll be fine." I said, "How much?" He's like, "The whole thing."
Oh God.
Man, an elk penis is kind of like a softball bat.
Oh God.
Yeah, no.
Oh God, no.
No,
yeah, no. I'm cool on all that. Man, that's a whole long way to go through.
I'm sure there's a way to make some kind of concentrate out of it. But still, that's a lot of no.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of no. Whole lot of no.
So I think there must be some cultural component, like the act of buying one and not telling anybody about it. And then realizing that you spent however much money for a fucking elk.
Yeah, I mean, that train ride home has to be the most shame-filled, carrying the bag, like a gigantic fucking bag through, and you don't want it to drop out.
Because there's one person who knows what it is, and they're they won't make eye contact.
Some dude in history has dropped an elk penis on a fucking subway somewhere, and all all the passengers knew exactly what it was because it was a giant fucking elk dick. Like, I mean, man, that's where you don't want to be the dude dropping the elk dick
That's
on the
right.
fucking.
But that means that things like shark fin soup don't work for you. And shark fin soup, I've had shark fin soup. That stuff is like potent. It made me want to go out and like go.
I mean,
dance
it
and, like,
sounds like some Highlander of dick shit. Like, you take another animal's dick and absorb its dick energy. You hold the elk penis on the hill. There can be only one.
That's where big dick energy comes from. It comes from elk and bear and boar.
Oh god.
Well, that's what Red Bull has a chemical that's also found
Taurine.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole generation of energy drinks that rely on non-xanthine stimulants that are also found in other animals' testicles. So, humans we're pretty weird. We drink
Big ball energy drinks.
ball energy drinks. As if coffee wasn't stimulating enough.
Yeah, we gotta constantly kick it up a notch.
Or we drive a rhino to extinction because we think that grinding up its nose horn, which amounts to a fingernail, a giant or a giant cluster of hair that's grown into a horn, but it's essentially the same material as the toenail. They're grinding up and eating or drinking or just somehow ingesting, maybe even smoking. Can you imagine if they're smoking a rhino horn? That's a toenail.
You don't hear women out endangering whole species to have better orgasms. Like, that's some man shit. That's some shit only men would do. Fucking kill off an entire species for fucking boners. Like, god damn it, man. Come on. Man, I'm not saying women should go out and do that in the name of equality, but I'm just like, where are the fucking female orgasm-based genocides hat? They're just not there, like.
Well, wait. There was an extended period of time when humans were hunting whales for blubber, and in addition to being used for fuel, they were using some of that fat to make. There's a compound that they pull out of their stomachs. Ambergris.
I guarantee you the women weren't hunting the whales.
No, but this chemical is used in production of the finest perfumes to this day.
Yeah.
And they would kill some whales just for the ambergris.
But these are also people who can't shower, and
This is also true.
so they need to have some shit to cover up the smell so they can
something
fuck.
that can coexist with the stomach acid inside of a whale.
Oh god.
That's how fucked up that is. And so there was a period of time where but it was mostly driven by fuel, because that was before we developed kerosene and stable fuel supplies, and people wanted to have their lit streets and lit houses, and fuel oil was derived from whale blubber, and so we drove them into extinction so we could light our houses and a lot of times burn houses down. and also cover up the smell of piss and shit.
Yeah.
Because humans are pretty dirty for a long time. I try to imagine, whenever I watch like Civil War movies, for a brief moment I think to myself, God, I bet it smells horrible.
Oh,
and then I remind myself, Tien, don't think about it, because
Jesus
you know that it
Christ.
has to smell absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to smell that.
No.
Or even project what it smells like, because there's nothing Civil War battlefield odor. Oh my goodness.
That's why I'm cool with on backwards time travel, man. Like,
Oh yeah.
I'm all good on that. I don't need those smells in my life.
No, not at all. I think that there's plenty to be explored with forward time travel, because then you don't actually endanger your own existence.
Well, I'm too black to go back in time.
Yeah, really.
Can't. That's a white man's thing.
But what if there was like this, 50,000 years ago, there was an age of man where like everyone had, bronze skin, and
Oh yeah, of course.
and it was a very egalitarian society, and people were cool and didn't kill each other.
I'm convinced,
but I don't know. I mean, obviously this place didn't exist.
No. It may have, because I'm convinced that the story of Jacob and Esau is effectively telling the story of the first mutated Caucasian, or whatever you want to call white people, in the sense that they go through painstaking effort to talk about the pale skin, and that's kind of where there are not a ton of pale skinned people in the Bible.
Yeah, and not even albinism.
Not even, yeah, it's not albinism either, and this is where, to me,
like, albinism doesn't come till later or something, right?
Yeah, and it's also like it's like a super random mutation too. Yeah. So it's not something that is necessarily even directly passed down, as far as I know.
Yeah, no, it's just it's like literally the cosmic dice roll.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where, looking at race and how race has come about. Race is very new as a construct, even though skin color has been alluded to for a while. So I'm starting to think that obviously the Bible in its singular incarnation is a later construct. But what I'm thinking is that the original texts are coming from a storytelling. That specific story is one that is an old story alluding to what could possibly be the first white people being born to dark-skinned people, as to why it would be weird for one twin to come out light-skinned and one twin to come out darker, because it's a mutation, and that's why it would be noteworthy in the first place.
Yeah.
And this is where, so when we're also talking about like Cain and Abel and the land of Nod and the original tribes that they're talking about in Genesis. So that's kind of where I'm wondering if the original story is written. I mean, it's obviously only written from the point of view from one tribe, but the issue becomes we're in the Western context, we're basically told that there's only one tribe to start with, but that's never reconciled with the notion that the fucking Cain had to leave and mated with the daughter of another tribe. So the offspring of Adam and Eve mate with another tribe that we don't discuss in Genesis. So it's clearly Adam and Eve are not the only humans at the time, and this is where it's people who are literalists say that those are the only people at the time, but the texts clearly indicate that they're not. So there's all these confusing things about what the text is trying to say, because we're so far removed from its original creation.
Literal interpretations of the Bible don't allow for, the fantasy to exist. Like there isn't even a metaphor there at that point. It just becomes, and this becomes this, and this history becomes history, and history begat history. And
I mean, but that's so the Psalms are supposed to be the non-fictional part, from the Bible's point of view. So, or the fictional part rather, in the sense of it's written as poems that are not meant to be recounting history, whereas the rest of the verses are supposed to be written from historical perspective and giving a viewpoint of a person in most cases. And that's where it's written in a way that's meant to be historical, but it's not. Everything that is in that is not confirmed by third-party historical sources, but there are some things that are confirmed by third. So this is where when we talk about existence of certain empires or existence of certain cities, like Ethiopia is mentioned or something. So it's like we know that we know that it's basing its references off of real places. So there's things that exist today that existed then that we can connect it to, but then there's other things that, like the Jewish enslavement in Egypt. There's no historical proof of that. That's not to say it didn't happen, but the things that the Bible are saying about it don't have historical proof as to why it's framed historically, but it's then not historically accurate information. So that's kind of where it is. It's very difficult to discuss that piece of writing with a nuanced manner without insulting people who believe in it. But then if you're trying to be scientific about it without sounding too condescending about the information.
The problem that I've always had with Bible interpretations is that I always feel like it's a statement out of context leading to other statement out of context, but this second statement, the reinforcement comes from a completely different section, and then there's another to add on to it, but it's also from a different part of the Bible, and these things are all supposed to be used to correlate to one modified behavior. It's like a choose your own ethics package,
kind of, but at the same time,
and that's just like my dilemma with encountering the translations of the Bible on the internet, an attempted argument of some sort of why the Bible backs some kind of fundamentalist behavior, and it's hard for me to reconcile because I don't know these things. I wasn't really raised in that environment, so for me, it's completely fascinating because on some level, I imagine that there's a pretty healthy historical component that gets pushed aside because there's not any real accuracy. The accuracy is it's just way off, but it's close enough. I mean, there are some oral traditions where these things kind of line up. It just might not be the names that are in the book. It might have been, co-opted, but from a different culture.
Yeah. Well, and then also with calendars being changed and all that, it's going to be near impossible to line things up exactly.
Yeah.
That's one of the interesting aspects of looking at history. I remember when I first was introduced to the notion of before Christ or before Common Era, it didn't make sense to me as a kid, as if I was always questioning, were the people counting backwards? And to me, of course
they weren't counting down.
Of course not.
Surely they weren't counting down.
When it's framed this way to a child, or at least to my mind, that's how it's presented, as if everybody in history was waiting for Jesus to come and they were counting down to
they just knew he was going to show up.
And this is where, to me, I think it's meant to do that to a child's mind, but then the non-inquisitive child never breaks that notion. They just assume that that's the way it was, and this is how you get Americans who've been so conditioned by misinformation and false constructs that they're willing to believe pretty much anything that's put forth to them by someone who's claiming to be Christian fundamentalist. And I say that because most of them don't actually know the Bible enough to know what's bullshit.
Let's see. I'm trying to figure out when Jesus was born on the Chinese calendar. Let's see. The star was actually a comet flying by in the year 5 BC, which would put Jesus' birth during that year. The Han Dynasty had an eye for the sky. The Silk Road was in existence. It was the year of the fire dragon.
The Silk Road was already in existence. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, China had been around for
Oh yeah,
3,000 plus 4,000, 5,000.
God,
who
yeah.
knows? They might have been around for a whole 8,000 years before Jesus, which would be kind of interesting. Like, how many times have the Chinese lost their history to themselves? Because we only know 5,000 real years.
Absolutely.
But we have Korean texts, poetry that described a fully functional China 10,000 years ago. So that's kind of crazy shit.
Yeah.
Although I like the idea of Jesus was born in the year of the fire dragon. That's actually pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
And that's correlated to the alignment of the stars, because the Chinese had astronomy back then. So that's the component that I've always found really interesting about Bible history, biblical history, is that there is a Chinese timeline that also exists in parallel.
Yeah, which you're not taught at all in America.
Yeah, we don't
because
see it.
otherwise it would make it sound so ridiculous. These people are walking around on camels. Meanwhile, these people are performing large-scale trade and have a fully functioning mercantile part of their economy.
The further west you go, the more likely people are to live in like mud and filth.
Yeah.
But there is one isolated pocket of civility at the end of our trade route where they have sewer systems and lit streets. We call it Syria. But we only have a few cities, or a few places. Keep going east, it starts getting developed. There are roads, there are doctors and merchants and markets to conduct trade and commerce. And
because then you go south, and then it's like, who knows what shit was there that got destroyed by colonizers.
I have a feeling that there were like vast like societies that had giant like farms, and they traded in goods, and they didn't need Africa's a pretty rich place. And a few thousand years ago there was still a lot of water like flowing all over most of it.
Which is where I think the notion of a lush forest in which the pyramids or that civilization could have existed is not out of the realm of possibility.
Oh yeah, I try to imagine like Egypt and the pyramids, that region of the world, looking kind of like Cancun or Acapulco.
Well, because then that would mean it could be way older than we thought.
Oh yeah,
which would then make a lot more sense, I think, to a lot of people as to why our species feels like we've been here for a lot longer. I mean, obviously, the reconstruction of history from the retrospective lens is going to be difficult, but
when there are 200,000-year-old settlements in Southeast Asia, or in southern China, 200,000 years, and we're at year 2000 of our current calendar.
There's a war of ideologies we're at
1%. our current history represents 1% of what we know, and this was 200,000 years ago, a civilization where they had cemeteries for their dead. 200,000 years ago.
Jesus.
That's incredible.
That is incredible.
That's a human settlement outside of Africa that predates Western or European settlements.
Jesus.
So we know that we've been around for a long time. So there's recently I was reading about how there's a section of the geological record that's just missing, a big chunk, and it's because, and it correlates to a time period when we would have had a frozen Earth during like a really severe ice age. And so during this period, the kind of glacial migration would have accounted for grinding down the surface of the Earth, a pretty significant section, down to nothing, and then just like allowing it to be reabsorbed into the sections where the plates were coming together and pulling material back into the mantle. So there actually is a great potential that humanity could have settled in places and lost.
The Earth swallowed it up.
The Earth just swallowed it up. There's a lot of potential for that.
Yeah.
And of course...
And then we would have no fucking idea.
Yeah, none.
That's the craziest part about it, man. There's no fucking proof.
Yeah. If the Earth swallows it, I mean, what are you going to do? the Earth...
Schrodinger's cities.
Yeah. The Earth is so vastly huge. Even though it's not the biggest planet, it's still so vastly, immensely huge that, like, cities are just kind of like dots from images from the space station.
Yeah.
You can only see them when they're lit up, really.
Right.
And that's if it's like a booming city.
Yeah. And that's like, you know, that's what, 120 miles away.
Yeah.
So it's not far out in space that, you know, we start to become a dot.
Yeah. That's a 2-hour drive.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The whole city ain't shit now. Yeah, it's always interesting to think about how close space is relatively. Obviously, it takes a lot of energy to get there, but
yeah. Well, I like the idea of a moon base because of the reduced gravitation, gravity, and the energy requirements to get something off of the moon are considerably less.
That's exactly where the long distance spacecraft should be built and launched from.
Oh yeah,
not Earth.
Especially because of its orbital period, it allows more opportunities to launch. Just offers more real windows because of its relative position is always changing. And because it's rotating in the right direction, it allows us to throw things the right direction also.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot about the moon that's amazing.
And also if they can find a way to extract the helium-3 and stabilize the fusion process, because then we have then it's a fueling station.
Yep.
Then we have a refinery on the moon to create the fuel to get to wherever we need to go.
Which would be amazing. That's totally possible.
And realistically, we only need enough fuel to get to that moon of is it Jupiter or Saturn? They also believe it to be full of helium. It's I can't remember, or maybe it's like Neptune or Uranus or one of those like the gas planets that are like loaded up with all the gases. Like I'm sure there's some planet out there that's got like, you know, it's so cold it's got like solid blocks of frozen helium. That'd actually be really cool. That'd be a really good premise for science fiction. like a helium mine where people are walking around and like with pickaxes and knocking at it. Well, you can't use a mining laser because you'll activate it and then it'll blast you into space. And so you got to chip away with a old-fashioned.
Lost the whole planet when they first tried the lasers in the helium mines.
The entire mine exploded. the reaction didn't stabilize until like one of the planetary storms moved in and just vanquished it because it was too violent for the ignition reaction to maintain itself or something like that.
Star to go supernova. Yeah, that could be a good start of a story. Yeah.
It's all about getting off the planet. Like, it's a short story. It only takes like 3 or 4 minutes of a real time for the whole story, right? Because you got to get off. I mean, if you don't, it doesn't matter how fast your ship is. The thing's about to ignite. The surface is, at least. From a distance, it would appear to be a small, like, low-burning stove star. Like it would just be like a light blue. But SpaceX rockets can land on it with their direct heat. Their rockets doesn't ignite the surface, just the mining laser. It's got to be like because you're trying to cut it, and you have to dial in the frequency of the laser itself. which is state dependent. So it's like a density and temperature of the frozen helium. Probably getting way out of reality now. In this universe, these rules apply. Damn it.
If it's a new state of matter, it'd be awesome. Discover a new state of matter.
I mean, we're talking about something that's like below absolute zero for helium to turn into a solid, I think. I'm pretty sure helium stays a liquid, like right down. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it goes solid at absolute. I don't think we can mine things at absolute zero. I think it's too dangerous.
Probably not, yeah.
The robots wouldn't work. Oh, wow. That would actually be a fantastic premise for a science fiction, actually. A planet where the laws of physics allow for... It's got to be a planet located right within the accretion disk of a black hole or something like that will allow for the helium to turn into a solid. Which means for this story to work, the space flight has to include something that's able to get into and out of black holes. That's a really advanced society. They're not mining fucking helium to get fuel. They've got really advanced energy sources, unless they're using the helium to create drugs.
They're like... The drug allows you to go into different dimensions or some shit.
Yeah, no, they use the drug so that the simulators they use to experience 20th century Earth are more realistic.
That's funny shit.
And so they're basically breathing in, they're huffing party balloons full of helium so that they can...
Okay, so I think this gets back to a good segue into Bandersnatch, because... There's a funny notion of higher beings using their power to create simulations of lower beings over and over. And I think this is where the idea of simulation theory is sexy to a lot of people, or the notion that we're living in a simulation seems plausible to many, because we keep being bombarded with this notion that that's what higher beings would be predisposed to do. And that's because we're living in a video game / simulation rich era. So I obviously
surely they'd have their version of GTA, right?
I mean...
Why not?
Again, this is where...
Except they call it civilization.
But this is where, to me, like, this notion of imposing our habits onto higher beings is something we do as a species over and over and over. Like, every period in history, we keep imposing our behaviors onto the higher beings, whether it's a Judeo-Christian god or a simulation creating alien species.
No, that's absolutely true. We tend to forget in the whole leveling up process that we change all of our behaviors and we develop a whole set of like positive behaviors, and we create a world where those behaviors lead to new generally successful endeavors, because you're trying to make a better version of yourself. And so, but it's really easy to forget that you have to people make changes to accomplish things.
And this is where I think Bandersnatch was a really great simulator, and I hesitate to call it a game. Many people are framing it as an interactive game, and I don't think it is an actual game for a few reasons. And I think it's a simulator for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that it's very good at showing potential alternate realities, whereas you look at a game, or what people would call a game like The Sims, which is actually in most cases a simulator, it's actually very difficult to get to see different realities until you live a full one through, because it takes so much time. Or like SimCity 2000. SimCity 2000, it took a long time to play a round. So after you played 2 or 3 rounds, you did start to understand different realities as to why this represents something more like a simulator versus a game, which usually only has one ending, and in some cases starts to have multiple endings. So you look at a game like Mass Effect 3, it had multiple endings, but those endings weren't varied enough for people who played the game to consider them to be different.
Yeah.
So this is where, and another reason I don't think Bandersnatch was a game was because there was no clear win-lose scenario. Whereas I think in a game, you'd have to have what's a clear
it should boot you out to the lobby if you lose
or something.
Like there have been a couple of games that
well, technically, I think in this you lose every time. Like, and this is where, to me, Bandersnatch is a simulator of all losing scenarios. There's like no win scenario, which is why I still hesitate to call it a game. Because if there was truly a game, there would at least be a win scenario, unless we just haven't gotten it. And that's kind of where I'm still leaving it open. And I don't know if I'll ever try it enough to get to a complete win scenario.
It's an early version of the Kobayashi Maru.
Absolutely. And even then,
the only way out is
because we can't modify the code, we still can't win. At least in the Kobayashi Maru, there's a way around it, a way around the rules. Like, our rule set is untouchable.
Yeah.
Like, we can't change the rules. Thus, like you were saying, it is more like a maze, and we're stuck within what even is just the appearance of choices, because in many cases you find out that the branch doesn't actually lead to different choices or different outcomes, so it forces you to make the choice that you didn't want to make. I think the example you gave was when in the story they wanted to talk about the mom and you didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But the story pushes you to talk about the mom.
Oh yeah, keep saying you should talk about her. You should talk about her. You might learn something.
Whereas if this was truly...
Are you sure? You should talk about her. You might learn something.
If there was another, if there was another branch in which that story was able to keep going where you didn't talk about the mom, then that would have been a truly larger scale interactive potential game if they did, like I said, create a full win scenario. But I also am wondering if it's possible to spoil something that has multiple outcomes, but I'm also skeptical of if there are actually multiple outcomes, because in the sense of, I think there's like 2 or 3, but they're trying to make it seem like all of the different possible iterations are reflective of the outcomes, which is deceptive, I think, on their part.
I was able to get 2-star, 3-star, 5-star ratings on the game whenever I got to the whole, like, you're at the end of the game, or whenever end of the simulation where you try to get the game to get published. And then one time I got to see the future ending where they show a modern game developer reintroducing Bandersnatch for the modern gaming environment.
But it's through Netflix, and they can't talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we can't go into details. It's the woman.
Yeah.
Like the woman designer. Yeah, I got. I went.
It's like
that one too.
It's like the child of the main game developer at the company. Colin's child is the one that develops the game for Netflix, but can't say anything.
Yeah.
So that was like a weird, like, okay, whatever. But that was only when I got like a low star rating, the game was not finished because I think I chose to kill Stefan or something like that, and I think that's how I got that ending.
So did you ever tell Stefan that you were watching him on Netflix?
Oh yeah, I did that one too.
And that's like, I think at that point, this was one of the things that, this is also an interesting aspect of the...
it allowed us to break the fourth wall.
Well, this is one of the things, when you break the fourth wall in that context, I would argue that then the person becomes the person who's watching the game or interacting, pressing the buttons, becomes protagonist, and Stefan then switches to the antagonist. And this is where it's like, it's an interesting... This is why, to me, I think it would have done with some better explanation of if there were a rule set, or if they're trying to be a simulator, because to me, this is where if there was a rule set, this would have been the easiest way to say, articulate that you are a player and you are the player driving it. Whereas if it's just a simulator, this is a weird way to bring the user into the simulation and break the fourth wall. So there's two different things happening.
There was one time that I tried to make all of the wrong decisions, and after a while it took away the wrong decision and only allowed you to take one decision. So there is, I think there's some kind of fail-safe at certain sections where it's like, look, you got to go forward, and the only way forward is this option.
Yeah.
And there's several times when he's trying to get into his dad's lockbox, the electronic safe, where, there are several different paths to go on, but you're only ever given 2 of the 4 options at any time. And so that's kind of, the decisions you make leading up to that junction determine which the decisions you get to make. But if those decisions that are first optioned out don't lead to an outcome that you can move forward on, eventually it shows you the rest of the options. So if it reveals all 4 options at some point because those don't lead anywhere, and they assume you want to keep simulating, then in that sense, getting to that point doesn't matter. You're going to get there somehow. So that's one of those like a fixed point in time,
right?
That this event is going to happen no matter what. You can choose one of these paths to get there, but you're always going to end up here no matter what you do. And from here, there are only so many paths that lead out anyways, but they're even less than the ones that got you there. So it's definitely the illusion of interaction,
right?
Because you're faced with a few things. Ultimately, you got to stop watching it because there's only 5 hours of actual footage, whatever they said, and realistically, I mean, I've spent quite a long time trying to figure out which way goes where, and it's not easy because you can't really have 2 Netflix screens open simultaneously unless you want to. Really fancy account probably allows for multiple simultaneous screens.
You have to probably sign in on a VPN and sign into 2 accounts.
Well, I think if you have the 4K enabled account, you can have multiple screens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna pay extra for that. Seriously, there's no 4K content that's worth it right now. When I first bought my 4K displays, I was all about it. It's like, I'm gonna watch everything on YouTube. Well, you know what? There was literally 3 months worth of nonstop 4K content on YouTube at the time, and then it was waiting for stuff that I didn't care about. And I don't even watch TV. And really, just I figured they'd be really excellent desktop monitors because 4 screens worth of real estate, no bezel to block the view in the middle. That's kind of nice, and I can watch movies on them. But there just still isn't even that. I guess no, that's not entirely true. Athletics, modern professional athletics, they take advantage of 4K, of really high definition stuff.
Yeah.
And there are a few times when a movie can really take advantage of it, but we're talking a 50 or 60 gigabyte Blu-ray file.
I mean, at a certain point,
that's just obscene.
It goes beyond
it's diminishing returns. Yeah.
Which is where we don't have eagle eyes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
it'd be great if we did.
It might. Now there's an absolute benefit when you get to a certain viewing size and viewing distance. Then
right, yeah.
But I mean, with 8K, the new one on the horizon or whatever the new one's being delivered. I think IMAX can take advantage of 4K, but I don't think it even requires 8K.
Yeah. At that point, yeah.
That's just obscene.
I mean, the detail that it
16 1080p monitors worth of resolution
doesn't add anything to the viewing experience.
No, it doesn't.
At a certain point.
Yeah, because the blockbuster movies, they can't even contain that much information. They tried with the Hobbit trilogy. They shot that at super high frame rates, and they put detail in every possible section of the frames possible as they could, and people rejected it. They said it was hard to watch. It was too busy. There was too much going on. It's there absolutely is an upper limit to what we can perceive, and I think that's actually like one of the things that makes motion picture film storytelling so interesting. Actually, one of the things I think that the Bandersnatch doesn't do well is by like, because we're forced to watch these really limited options. Like, they have to make everything kind of bland looking so that they don't run into continuity issues.
Yeah.
And it wasn't visually interesting to, like, it just, there wasn't any, it was all kind of story packaged around this, oh, you get to make your own decisions, but you don't. And so, I mean, it wasn't even a good noir when I made it dark, and when it was just about a kid with mental illness, it wasn't fun because his mental illness wasn't fun. It wasn't like he got to have really crazy adventures and delusions. He was just like depressed. And when it was, you know, conflict with his, who wants to watch a story about some kid who's in conflict with his dad all the time?
Right.
That's not
for no reason.
Yeah, I know, for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
Like, so it was like an exercise in frustration almost.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, man, whatever panel whatever focus group decided that this story was going to be a good idea,
it failed.
Shame on them. They gave us such a weird version of humanity.
Well, I think what's crazy about this form of media is that it's obviously going to have to be individualized if it's that type of approach. But what it also closes the door to is shared experiences if they're able to pull it off in a different way, where you could be online having these experiences at the same time with other people who are different characters in the story, and your paths are crossing, and you're like, one person plays Stefan, one person plays Colin, so like while one person's playing Colin and going through his storyline, when you guys finally meet in the office, he makes the decisions of what to say to you, and it's not just a one-sided interaction. I think this is where
so that'd be like if Second Life was built on the Unreal Engine and had photorealistic avatars.
And also outcomes that impacted the world and were played out.
And we have the same
world,
kind of...
which is what The Sims kind of did
interface that they
in a rudimentary way, which is why I think this is a very good base first attempt at a simulator in that context, but not really a game. And this is why I keep getting back to the whole simulator element of like what it could be, because as a story, like what I'm learning is that when there's not a clear story, people impose the story themselves.
Yeah.
So then if there is a story to be told, putting all these like different choices and all these different trees is going to give the user too much control of trying to create their own narrative. And if you try to force them into this end, then it's going to feel like an empty experience because they actually wanted this other end now, because you gave them the perception that they could create this end of a story, but really it was only one ending the whole time. So there was never actual possibility of anything but this one thing. But because they felt that every time the person who wanted a different ending gets to that forced ending, they're going to feel disappointment. And that's why I think this form of media, there's going to have to be understanding of what constitutes real different endings. And when you're saying, oh, we're going to have different endings, they have to be really different to actually satisfy that notion of chaotic exploration that people
there should have been a storyline where he met some girl on the bus and missed his meeting entirely. And there's that storyline leads to a romance that may or may not fail.
Right. Absolutely. And there's all these other things.
There should be one where the bus is like the bus from Speed, and he's a passenger on a bus that has a speed-based bomb, and some reprisal of Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves are on the bus telling everyone to stay calm. There should be a lot of variations that are possible. That's why we need some kind of specialized quantum computing environment for that, I think.
Yeah,
to process all of these interactions simultaneously.
Absolutely. And part of it though is then what we're talking about is something that is a form of entertainment that we're trying to achieve, but we don't even know how to define yet because it's unseen, and this is kind of where this is why it feels inadequate, is because I think we're on the way to something that we're obviously not to yet, but we're plotting forward to it through different forms of media, whether it's virtual reality, this interactive Netflix thing, Xbox 360, all these things are on there is a unified path from which to observe all of these things, including the 4D theaters that have like the snow, if it's snowing in the movie, or if the tires screech.
Oh yeah,
you can smell that shit. So all these things are converging. You know, so I'm interested to see if you know, what's going to be really interesting is how porn lead these things too, because porn is usually the leader of most technological development, and this is where the convergence of choice and interaction and hardware and virtual reality and augmented reality, I think, is going to be best and first achieved through some pornography thing, and then that's going to determine how it then disseminates through the rest of entertainment.
When the 3D television first became pretty viable and they first started releasing movies in 3D, I remember.
Where'd that go anyway?
I don't remember, but I remember a buddy of mine up in Indianapolis had one, and he had 4 sets of lenses, and we put them on, and I think we watched Rambo. And there's a scene when Rambo has a big gun, he swings it out across the audience, and there's this giant gun that was like in front of all, I think it would have been like 4 times the scale. It was huge, filled the living room. And in that moment I thought to myself, God, I hope this never turns into porn. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential for some really intricate storytelling with 3D experience, but it's
we're also going to have to learn. It's not. I don't think it's going to be possible to have that shit for like 2 hours straight.
No, I think it's very visually fatiguing.
Yeah.
I think that every time I've seen a 3D experience of any kind, it's like, afterwards I don't want to look at anything. Like I just go to sleep.
Yeah, it's extremely exhausting.
And it's the opposite of like a sensory overload, like going and seeing fireworks, where your auditory and visual systems are just like pushed into the extremes of a visual or auditory experience. It's like it's pushed into a place where it's like unnatural. I think there are definitely some sounds that are unnatural that when you hear it for long enough, it'll just wipe you out.
Yeah.
Like I know, in fact, I know that there are some like sonic weaponry used for crowd control that just create loud as can be noises that are just painful, and it wouldn't, like, I'm sure if you were too close it would make you pass out. But I don't think people can like withstand those things, those fields. I think everyone just tries to get out because it's like
debilitating,
fucking punishment.
Yeah.
So there's a period in one of the Hulk movies, I think it's the Ed Norton Hulk, where they're like firing sonic weapons at him, and he's just like because it hurts him, because he's the Hulk. He's got super hearing in addition to super strength. It's just gonna make him more mad though.
Right.
That stuff's crazy.
Yeah.
But I think that like
I think in the comic books now they've even given the power that if his head gets cut off, his body will regenerate through telekinesis. Like Hulk has been powered up fucking crazy now.
Man.
Because I think before it was like if you cut off his head or something, which was not easy to do, then you might have been able, I think you were able to kill him that way, but now that's not even, like, if he's in Hulk form, you can't even do that.
Yeah, the Hulk's pretty overpowered. I recently read about there was this what is it, like Rune King Hulk. So when we talked about how, you know, Odin may have quested for all the stones, and we're pretty certain that he's had his own gauntlet, because Hela's like fake, knocks it off and all that good stuff. Apparently part of him losing an eye was so that he could gain extra power over the Odin Force. And so Rune King Hulk represents a version of Thor, represents a version that has taken both eyes. And so his vision in the place where his eyes were is replaced with like the lightning energy that he commands, and now he is omniscient and all powerful. It's like the most powerful version of Thor that can exist, because he's essentially like, you know, the most powerful being to wield the Odin Force. Nothing else has ever had that kind of power. Not even Odin, because Odin kept one of his eyes.
That's funny.
Because you don't need to see when you're all knowing.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of, you don't need eyes. You know what's happening. And I was thinking about it, it's like, why would they, I mean, I understand why they would explore that story, but where does that even go?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like,
just basically put him on the sidelines.
Yeah, at that point it's like, hey, Thor, just hang out, man. No one can even be in the same room with you right now. It's like, just when you speak, it kills us. Like, literally, you just killed Hawkeye the other day. We can't even get close enough as to his body yet, because he's still so like charged up.
Yeah. When heroes get overpowered, you realize that that's kind of where Superman hit that point where, as the fans, it's like, okay, you need to tone it down.
Yeah.
But I think before it happens, you assume you want your character to be super all powerful, but then when it does, you realize how
lame they become.
Yeah, there's no conflict at that point.
Well, it's just not a challenge.
Conflict, yeah.
There's no challenge. There's no struggle.
There's no story.
There's no I see the reason
there's no challenge to overcome if you have no.
The reason that I always like Spider-Man is because he's always pushing uphill, no matter where he is, no matter how good of a photography he is. He's gonna get complaints about these photos. He's like, "Is this all you got? Go out and get me more." It's like sorry. This is the only newspaper that has these exclusive photos. I'm sorry, they're not good enough for you. Maybe I can take them to the New York Times. It's like, what the hell are you doing out here? Here's some money. Now go get me more photos. It's like
showing everybody how to freelance.
Only J. Jonah Jameson could be that much of a douchebag.
Yeah.
Like complaining about the only photographs of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I remember reading that as a kid and thinking that work was like that, but it did prepare you, like, for never being able to please your superior. Like, even Peter Parker can't please his boss.
And he's Spider-Man. He's like a straight A science genius, and he can't please his boss, and he gets the best pictures of Spider-Man out there.
It wasn't like J. Jonah Jameson ever won a fucking Pulitzer or some shit. I don't know. Yeah.
He was a World War II reporter, so there's some backdated, retroactive stories of him like punching Nazis, I think. I'm pretty certain they created this whole backstory to validate his
attitude.
Yeah, and why he's such a hard ass. But unnecessary shit. Just unnecessary.
Fuck that dude anyway.
Well, speaking of not being able to please your boss, I was reading this article. It was like a BuzzFeed article. It's like a 30-minute long read about how there's this unique feature of millennials. It's workplace burnout. Because the millennial generation was taught to just keep going, just keep push through. Your hard work and effort will pay off, and it only pays off for like 3% of people who work really hard to push through whatever it is that's stopping them from being, creative or taking that next step to unlocking the next set of achievements, whatever, the next milestone. Like there's only so much that hard work and effort can accomplish, because you will run into physical and psychological exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like our generation apparently was not equipped for this because previous generations didn't have the level of productivity that we're expected to meet with computers.
Yeah,
because it's like the productivity is skyrocketed, but that's the only thing that skyrocketed.
Yeah. Pay hasn't,
and then
benefits haven't.
And then the generation that has followed us, they're like aware of this, like, oh yeah, don't overdo it, you'll kill yourself, you'll just burn out, don't do these things.
Yep.
Take it easy on yourself. And then of course the pedagogy has shifted to, don't kill yourself, don't burn out, you've got to do this for a long time, we don't want you burning out at 30.
Yep. We need you at the grocery store, like bagging shit at 65.
We need you to get in line and complain about the people that are taking the jobs that you don't want to do.
And then we don't want you to think that the government should own robots to do all these things that would then pay you the profits.
Yeah.
As a nationalized form of capital.
So I was watching this video on YouTube about car companies that failed but not really, and one of them is Elio Motors, and they've been promising a product for the last decade, a 3-wheeled hyper fuel economy 2-person commuter vehicle. Essentially it's a motorcycle, an enclosed motorcycle, and their unique feature was that with the vehicle, when you sign the vehicle, they give you a line of credit, and whatever you buy in gas, they just take, let's say you spent $20 at the pump, they add another $20 on your bill. And the reality is, it's a motorcycle, and you would only ever put like $5 in, but you're getting 85 miles per gallon. So you spend $10, and it's like, oh, $10, and I went this many miles. It actually feels like a normal car for the first like 5 years until you pay it off, assuming you drive 12,000 miles a year, something like that, and it pays it off really quick, because you could buy one of these things for $9,000 if they were actually in production. He's been met with nothing but like obstacles, but this is a car that just by using would pay for itself. And they had orchestrated some kind of arrangement with Pep Boys to provide all of the parts and labor for maintenance, because Pep Boys is a parts shop, and they have a labor department where they'll do work on vehicles. So it's like there's this really interesting arrangement that's worked out. They've got everything they need. They just keep running into like regulatory issues, and a lot of them are like safety concerns raised by the real automakers who are making full-size cars that would just crush one of these things and flatten somebody because it's a motorcycle. But this is like a recession car.
Right.
We might actually start seeing things like this.
I mean, the whole car industry...
It's kind of collapsing.
I mean, the only reason it came about was because regulators stepped in to destroy the train industry.
Yeah.
That's reality. That's fact.
Yeah, mass transit was incredible.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And
in Indiana, there were trains going all over the state. You could ride almost anywhere.
That's where those leftover tracks are from.
Oh no!
And this is where, again, regulation is great when it works for the people, but when it works against the people, it's not great. So when we look at what regulation did to the economy via protection for automobiles, it destroyed our economy, and by proxy, we're destroying the planet.
Wouldn't it have been cool to like be able to go to Indianapolis for like 75 cents
on a monorail?
Yeah. Like, you just go there because you got to go shopping, and then when you go home, you just cart whatever it is you bought on like a dolly.
I mean, I still do not understand why monorails are not the norm when you have an elevated train.
Why is China leading the path to like that kind of
Right.
of mass transit? Why is it that China? Why is it China doing this? Why aren't we? We have so many. I know it's because we have this old infrastructure, and we want to keep using it because it still works, and it costs a lot to build a new infrastructure, and
but it also costs a lot to stay on the old infrastructure and destroy the planet in the process, which is what is not being taken into this calculation.
And the incredible industry that exists to maintain the existing train network and infrastructure, because they have these incredible systems that pull up the old rails and move the old ties, and then lay down entire 50-foot sections of track. And then they have a machine that welds it together in those locations and smooths it off in one machine. It's all in one thing. It just rides the track down and lays the track as it goes. And if it has to build in a section that does the track change thing, they just lay some tracks over it, and then its computer goes and cuts the things necessary where it needs to make the overpass junction shit. It's incredible. Like, it's all machine. It's automated. There's like an operator who probably has to go through some really advanced machine operator training to use this stuff. Probably an engineering degree of some sort. And this is how they build trains or build railroads now. It's not a bunch of dudes swinging fucking hammers. Yeah. There aren't jobs in that industry. It's highly skilled. And I feel like, there's back to what I was saying about what if we deployed like our nationalized employment system to build infrastructure? We could build monorails or maglevs or whatever advanced technology, mass transit, so quickly, all at once, all over the entire country, because every state has some branch where people sign up to join the nationalized employment system.
Yeah, that's what it should be reformulated and re-outfitted for.
There's got to be a way.
It only makes perfect sense, really.
National employment. We got to. And I'm trying to work out so it's like NEWBS. National Employment Works Bureau S. Works Bureau and
noobs.
National Employment Works Bureau and
stuff.
Stuff.